Lost boys. In March 2025, the Centre of Social Justice released this report, which has sent a couple of shockwaves across the UK, especially across the media. And just to give you a little bit of a sort of preface and some context on what this report says, at the start of the report, Andy Cook, who's the CEO of the report, says, "We listen to those working on the front line, the teachers, the youth workers, the charities, and the parents who day in, day out see the struggles of young people. And in recent years, they've been telling us the same thing. Something is going on with our boys." And because of this, they wrote this report called The Lost Boys, which looks at all of the different facets of why young men are struggling. And in this report, they say boys are struggling in education. They're more likely to take their own lives. They're finding it more difficult to find stable work. And far too often they're caught in crime. The numbers don't lie. Something has shifted and we cannot ignore it any longer. It's not just about Andrew Tate or online influencers. These are symptoms, not the cause. The deeper truth is that too many boys are growing up without the guidance, discipline, and purpose they need to survive. And there's some frankly horrific graphs, which I actually sent the CEO of my company, a lady called Georgie, into quite an emotional state. She texted me and told me she was crying looking at some of these graphs, which we'll talk about today. But this is a subject that I know both of you know very, very well. So I'm keen to get into exactly why this is happening and what we can do about it. But to preface this discussion, to understand where you both come from and the perspective you have, Logan, who are you
Yes.
and what do you do?
I'm a behavioral scientist turned dating coach. So that means that I take all of the lessons from the field of behavioral science, how we make decisions, and then I apply them to the field of relationship science, which is how love works. And so I'm really passionate about this topic because for a long time, I've found that wherever I go, people say, "Oh, I know all these great single women. Do you know any great single guys?" And I just thought, "Oh, okay, maybe that's always been happening." But when I actually dug into the data, I saw that we are truly in a dating crisis right now, and there is a huge mating gap between the type of men that women are looking for and the type of men that are available. This is a critical conversation around truly the future of humanity because marriage rates are down. That means birth rates are down. And so this conversation is extremely important.
And what sort of reference points do you draw upon? Because you've got some sort of unique access to data, right?
Right. So I work at Hinge for the last 5 years. And so I have access to tons of data there around how daters are dating now, how daters are dating differently, what sets successful daters apart. And then I also have conducted my own research for this conversation. So I sent out a survey to thousands of my newsletter subscribers, and people were very excited to talk about this. And I've conducted a lot of new research that I'll be sharing for the first time on this topic.
So I make my living looking at data and trying to come up with insights. I spent most of my career looking at data to try and add shareholder value, and then I have the luxury now of focusing on things I'm really interested in. And I just stumbled upon data that reflects that the cohort that is ascended fastest globally is women, and this is a wonderful thing and a huge collective victory. And the group that has fallen furthest fastest is men in Western markets. And the data was just so overwhelming. And also, I was close to being one of these men. I didn't have a lot of economic or romantic prospects when I was a young man, but there were programs and an environment where I could be successful. And I worry that some of the temptations of technology, the economic trends, had they been where they are now then, I could have very easily ended up a statistic. So I just sort of relate to these problems.
I'm keen to understand from your perspectives what you think like the first domino that falls in a young man's life or a young boy's life that causes the outcomes we're talking about today. Like where is the first place to start?
So the research I've looked at, and Richard Reeves from the American Institute of Boys and Men has done good research here, the point of failure, if you reverse engineered issues to, is when a boy loses a male role model. And that is, in the US, we have the second most single family parent homes behind Sweden. And what's interesting is that in single parent homes, girls actually have similar outcomes, similar rates of high school attendance, income, rates of self-harm. Boys, once they lose a male role model, become much more likely to be incarcerated, engage in criminal activity, harm themselves. It ends up that while being physically stronger, boys are emotionally and mentally much weaker. So the loss of a male role model is, I would argue, kind of the first point of failure that predicts that a boy is going to struggle. And that has impacts on family court, economic policy, and just general zeitgeist in our society where men need to step up. If we want better men, we need to be better men. We need to step into that void.
Another one that Richard Reeves talks about is that there's not enough men in the education system. So I
100%.
believe when Tim Waltz was a teacher, 1 out of 3 teachers in his school was a man, but now it's like 24%.
Yeah.
And so where do kids spend most of their time? In school. And who's teaching them? Mostly not men.
And you think, well, women can be fantastic teachers, and it's true. But after school programs, not as many coaches that typically are male, not as much compensation, so they don't get rewarded for being coaches. And if you just think about it logically, who does a teacher champion? A teacher champions someone that reminds them of themselves when they were a kid. So, and also just look at there's incredible bias, I would argue, against males in school. A boy is twice as likely to be suspended on a behavior-adjusted basis, twice as likely to be suspended for the exact same infraction as a girl, 5 times as likely if it's a black boy. And once you're suspended twice, it probably means you're not going to college. In addition, look at the behaviors we promote in school. Sit still, be a pleaser, be organized, raise your hand. You basically just described a girl. And also, quite frankly, a lot of the jobs that require tertiary education attainment, there's more women now in law school and medical school, and quite frankly, good for them. They're just better at that. They're better students. They deserve to make more money. They deserve it. But the reality is it has huge ramifications when we no longer have wood, auto, or metal shop. They've gone away.
Right.
So those used to be a path to do some middle-class jobs. They've been replaced by computer science. And so what are the paths for the 2/3 of males that aren't going to end up with a traditional liberal arts college degree?
Right. And just to add a few more stats to that, so we know that 70% of valedictorians in the US are female, and women are much more likely to be in the top 10% of their class. But then on the SAT, men and women, or young men and women, earn the same scores. So there's definitely something happening in schools that is prioritizing the female experience, or that women are better at that. We definitely want to celebrate the success of women. I think the changes that have happened over the last 50 years are incredible. And I feel like I'm a beneficiary of that. And so is my daughter. If you look at all of the books that my daughter was given when she was born, they're about great women in history. You can be anything. Dream big, little one. And so I feel like we have given women so many tools to achieve. And in many ways, those have been manifested. But now boys are being left behind. And so this isn't a zero-sum game. I was nervous about coming on here because I thought people would say, she's a male apologist. She doesn't see how much women are still struggling. I think everyone is struggling. I think life is hard.
Yeah.
But what's happening right now is we need to have empathy for young men, and we need to bring them up, because this isn't just a problem about young men. And patriarchy doesn't just hurt women. A lot of people think about the patriarchy as something that prizes men and hurts women. But when there's a very narrow definition of men, everyone is hurt by that. And that's all the research that I've done, is over and over seeing women feel like they are not enough good men to date, and men feel like they're being held to a ridiculous standard of holding both sides of the coin, being feminine and masculine.